15 months or so since I started, now I've gotten to the point where I've reached my goals. And to me, weight loss is always a goal, but it wasn't the primary goal. I took on board very much the other markers. So over that time, I've lost over 150 pounds. I've gotten my waist circumference to be less than half of my height. I've gotten off of all of my diabetes meds, and my last A1C was 4.2, going from a 9.3.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the Fasting Method podcast. This is Coach Terri. Very excited because this is a transformation episode. And some of you may know that these are always fun episodes for me because I love getting to talk to people who have been through the process and get to learn more about them. And sometimes I already know the person. I've worked with them as a coach or I know them from the community, but today I get to talk with someone that I don't know as well. And so I'm excited to learn more about his story. So today I have with me Dave Mitchell. Dave, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well. Thanks for inviting me.
Very good. We were talking before we got started here. You and I are on different sides of the United States. I am looking at 4 to 5 inches of fresh snow, and you are in a much warmer climate than I am. Is that right?
Yep, enjoying 70 degrees today.
Nice. Well, Dave, as I mentioned to you, why I get so excited about these is because I think one of the most powerful things for so many of us is getting to hear the stories of people that we can relate to. So I wondered if you could get us started by just kind of telling us a little bit about your journey. Then I'll jump in with some questions and some things as we get going.
I'd love to because other people's stories have inspired me and helped me, so I'm happy to. I've been overweight my entire life. I'm sure there were a couple of days in there where I wasn't, but it's not just a little overweight too. I was over 300 pounds for most of my life. I'm 62 years old now, so that's a fairly long life. When I was 30 years old, I was diagnosed as a type 2 diabetic. That was 32 years ago. So long time. I have done things right and I've done things not so right over the years. I've been able to lose weight probably about 5 times, get my A1C down to non-diabetic range, shed some pounds, feel good, but then derail myself before I ever reach goal, before I ever made permanent changes, doing diets where they made sense, but I was hanging on by a thread and counting the days till my next cheat day. And at the end of it, I knew I'd be done and could go back and eat. I convinced myself I wouldn't eat exactly the same thing, but knowing that, I could have those things I missed so much. So it became a cycle, up and down. Sometimes I was more strict, but I, did a decent job of managing the diabetes with medications so that I don't have a lot of at least obvious external damage. I'm damaged, obviously, that long with measures that were not good. A lot of it was low carb dieting, but as I went along, that became less effective and more medications. So by the time I got to 2021, a few years ago, I was on a blood pressure medicine, on a statin. I was on 3 diabetic meds to control things, as well as they could be controlled with my diet not always being great, but with efforts being made, some exercise, never enough. And then I had to add insulin in 2021. And so that should have been the big change that kicked me in the pants, but it didn't. I had last lost weight in 2015. So it had been 7 or 8 years. I had gotten complacent. These tools worked on the surface. I was low carb, but I was low carb with snacks, dirty low carb with processed things. It was clear that things were not going right. And then another change happened that finally gave me the big why. My job changed, that I went from being fairly active in moving around a building, fixing things and doing things to being stuck behind a desk. That happened in 2021, 2022, about the same time that I started to go on insulin. I could feel my overall condition and exhaustion and everything from just daily life start to increase. I moved less. I didn't necessarily change my diet. I didn't necessarily do things worse, but things started to slide. I could feel that. Same time, talking with my wife, who was a nurse, COVID had burned her out as a nurse, and we had the opportunity. We decided we would retire. And so we decided to retire at the end of 2023. A trip just before then, we went away and I couldn't even do the things I could do our last trip. Couldn't walk as much. Seeing the sights was exhausting. Everything was even more of an effort. And this is, from a guy who's lived his life 300 pounds. And so, life is exhausting and an effort, but this had taken it to a new level. And now we're facing retirement. We're going to be traveling more. Is this what retirement's going to look like? Is this what my life is going to look like? And you're retiring. Is your health going to be, are you going to retire for a couple of years and are you going to be dead? That became my why. That was the kick in the butt I needed. And I think in a way, having gone to that desk job and having that other level of exhaustion may have been the best thing that ever happened, because I may not have noticed how bad things were because I'd lived my life for so long that way that thinking that life could be different and not worse was not as obvious. I'd gotten very complacent. And so I started by the end of the year in November to try to lose weight. So I started to move a little bit more, cleaned up my diet a little bit, and was doing pretty well. But it was clear that things were moving slowly. And we took another trip in March and things were improved, but not as much as I thought they would be. I had lost about 50 pounds by then, had started to see my numbers drop. Things were looking better. And that was when I said, I need to put more of an effort in. There have got to be other things I can do.
And at that time, Dave, were you still taking the diabetic medications and the insulin?
I was still on insulin. And that was about the point that started to look at things. And March was when insulin could first be dropped a little bit, working with my primary doctor through all this, talking closely. And so that was the start. So I was ready to take a look at, well, what else can happen? And starting to be more conscious and thinking about what internally is going on. Why am I having to take more meds all the time? Why did this progress? And so started to look at YouTube like everybody else and discovered Dr. Fung, discovered the fasting method, became dedicated to listening to the podcasts. And so in April, I also made a dietary change in going carnivore for the whole foods aspect, nothing processed, nothing artificial sweeteners, none of those kinds of things, and started with TRE at the same time. And that, the two things together, and both deserve credit for me because I'm definitely a restrictor. I couldn't moderate. I couldn't do the other things. And I had to get control over cravings because if I was hanging on for a cheat day, I knew this wasn't going to work because I'd never made it to goal before. I'd lost weight, but I never made it to goal. And I knew things had to be different.
Have you ever thought, I am my worst enemy when it comes to weight loss or health goals? If so, you are not alone. But this barrier does not need to keep holding you back. I'm offering a self-sabotage workshop that can end this pattern of defeat. Together, we will explore the root causes of your self-sabotage and create strategies to overcome the thoughts and behaviors that have been preventing you from feeling the success that you are seeking. You will learn to proactively avoid the pitfalls that have kept you feeling stuck and develop new responses to triggers that have served as roadblocks for years. Join me at TFM for my self-sabotage workshop that begins in May. The links are in the show notes. You can also enjoy 10% off any of the workshops and masterclasses we are offering from now until November on the TFM website. This includes the 3-pack and 6-pack bundles, as well as the All Access Pass. using the coupon code PODCAST10, capital PODCAST 10.
I started with TRE, listened, read everything I could to get where I was going, started moving things, gradually added fasting, and found that fasting was something that I enjoyed. It was simple, as you've said, not easy, but simple. Got down to 2 meals a day for TRE, no snacking, got my diet dialed in the way I felt was right for me, and then started to go and went eventually to rolling 42s, became my fasting strategy. And now, 15 months or so since I started, now I've gotten to the point where I've reached my goals. And to me, weight loss is always a goal, but it wasn't the primary goal. I took on board very much the other markers. So over that time, I've lost over 150 pounds. I've gotten my waist circumference to be less than half of my height. I've gotten off of all of my diabetes meds, and my last A1C was 4.2, going from a 9.3. My fasting insulin was 2.2. My cholesterol numbers for HDL and triglycerides, both good. And my HS-CRP was 0.3. So all numbers that I've learned as being part of the fasting community here, the fasting method, are the signs that I'm actually at maintenance, not just my shredded beach body, which, doesn't exist, but healthy. And that's the place where I wanted to be. And so I do have one more marker that I want to confirm, which is my body fat percentage. And I have a DEXA scan in about 10 days to do that. But that's where I feel good. And I got teed up for it by joining the fasting method community. I am not a share accountability kind of guy. I'm not in the community for that. But that's just me, that recognize how valuable that is to other people. But the value I get from going to the meetings, and I attend a lot of them, is learning what other people are doing, learning what's worked for them, what hasn't worked for them, hearing the same thing presented in different ways, which you think everything I've read, everything I've done, you've learned it all. Nope. You hear it a different way. It's like, oh, now it makes perfect sense. And so those have been really valuable things. And also losing weight, I've succeeded at before. Maintenance, I've never succeeded at. So I also took the maintenance masterclass that was just offered. And I've gotten coaching now. And I've started to coach with Coach Heather. Because again, this is going to be the hardest part. And this is the part I do not want to fail. But things are different. And things are different because of what I learned, that I don't have the cravings that I did. I don't have the hunger that I did. I don't have cheat days. I don't count on my next cheat day. When I got to maintenance, I'm doing the same thing that I was doing before while I wait for my weight to stabilize, my body set point to change, and to be comfortable where I am before I think about adding some things back. And the things that think might add back are, I gave up dairy, not necessarily permanently, but it seemed to help. And so that's something I may at some point try to reintroduce and see if I can. At some point, carnivore has worked very well. Don't think I have to be carnivore, but adding back some vegetables is certainly a possibility. Little bits and pieces, but not anything that is not whole food and not anything that I would view as a treat. I still remember what treats taste like. I still remember them fondly, but as you have said so many times so well, they're not my food anymore. That's not for me. And again, people are moderators, people are restrictors, people have different things, but this works for me.
I love the piece you talked about nutritionally, that you had to go with a system that worked for you. Not necessarily saying this will be how I eat forever, but this is working right now. And this gave you so much leverage to make significant changes. And as you're in that maintenance mode, to start saying, are there things that I want to reintroduce? And it sounds like, from what you described, one of the challenges that I think many of us have experienced in old kind of dieting approach is that we didn't really test out what works and what doesn't work. We got done with the goal and we said, yay, I'm done. Let's go right back to those things. And you really have a different approach about how you want to trial that this time and see. And even the things that you're wanting to explore are in a more safe category for many people. And you're going to see, how do these vegetables work for me? If they do, great. If they don't, okay. What will I do then? I think one of the things you highlighted in this too, that sometimes for people who are a little bit earlier in the journey, it's a little hard to believe this, even though we say it, is that when the hunger is tamed, when the cravings are tamed, and you aren't using food for all of the other reasons besides, really because my body needs rebuilding and nourishment, we don't have the same draw to add back in those other things or to go back to those old patterns in our relationship with food that got us sick in the first place. That's something I've really heard in your story that's really different for you now.
It really is a game changer not because when I dieted before, it was every 30 days was an eat the bakery day. Basically, that it was your cheat day. And that meant I would have everything I missed. And of course, I could go back and I could do it, but that craving was there and the calendar was getting marked another 30 days and I can have another one of those. And the cleaner food of going whole food, not having keto cookies and all the things that conceivably I could still lose weight with, but would mean I would still have cravings because that was still there. That the hunger that those might cause because I was snacking on them and how those would sneak in and slow my progress. And also, things like nuts and things that would pop those things on and keep that craving there. The hunger was not as much an issue because it was low carb that I was able to keep myself fairly satisfied. But the game changer is absolutely no hunger and no cravings together. That gives me the ability to think way of life, not a finish line, that I can keep doing this and I can learn. I can make adjustments because I had to make adjustments as I went along here. I eat less than I did because I weigh less. That I couldn't just do the exact same thing as I went along. I had to listen to my body and I had to make adjustments. And that's another thing I learned from TFM is that you have to do these things. You have to make adjustments, that things are going to be different, and to look at what's going on, listen to your body. One of the things that helped me break through the last 20 pounds in the goal was mindful eating, that I didn't have the hunger cues and satiety cues that I should, that comfortably stuffed worked relatively well. I wasn't stuffing myself completely, but it became clear that that wasn't going to be enough to break through the last bit of the weight. So I started plating, as we learned, kind of like, there's my food for the meal. I'm sitting down. I'm not watching TV. I'm thinking about what I'm eating. I'm enjoying what I'm eating. It's not restrictive. It's good food. I'm enjoying it. I'm taking my time. And, I'm eating a little slower. Hey, I am satisfied. I don't feel stuffed. I don't feel full, but let's give that a try. Hey, I can get away with that. I'm not ravenous. I don't have to go back for more food. But sometimes I did. Still in that small, brief time where I ate my meal because my body said I needed it. And that and things I learned in the master class for maintenance got me through the place where I was actually a goal.
I love it. The other thing you just highlighted in that, Dave, is that one part of the healing of this journey is healing our hormones, healing our body signaling. like you said early on, didn't have very accurate signals to even if you were willing to listen to your body, you were getting really confusing messages. And now you can know more what is actual need to eat versus an emotional reason or boredom or, it would taste good. And getting to recognize, feeling the satiety signal now, that it doesn't have to be being painfully full to know to stop, but to actually be able to detect, I've had enough. Slowing down like you did, doing more mindful eating makes such a difference. But when insulin resistance is raging, those are more difficult to do. So I keep thinking about people who might be a little bit earlier in their journey. And, some of what you say might sound like dreamland to imagine that working, but you really offer that hope. You didn't have those accurate signals, but in the healing process, you came to experience them.
And it really was a matter of time. I don't think that even if I would have started practicing the plating and mindful eating right from the start, that would have been enough. As you said, the insulin beast had to be tamed. All the other pieces had to be there. My body had to heal. And so it was the two things together, the mindful eating, the slowing the pace, the listening for the signals that only then were loud enough to be there for me. It really took the combination, and it took time. None of this happens quickly. It takes time, but you do feel changes, and you got to celebrate those when you have them because they're small at first. It's kind of like, oh, I'm working out and my muscles aren't as sore.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sore all the time. Why am I not getting sunburnt when I'm outside? Why, are all these small things that happen? My skin's cleared up. All things that happened along the path, as well as the big things, but small things along the way.
Yeah, I love paying attention for those because, again, I think people get so focused on the number on the scale. They forget to look at all of the ways their body is changing and how their body responds to things, how that's changing. So I'm glad that you paid attention to those and that you highlighted them here. I'm curious, from people in your life, your medical team or doctor, and did anyone ever think these biomarkers that you described were possible for you?
No, not a chance. My doctor just keeps looking at him and saying, how? This is just, I've never seen this before. I can't believe. And then, basically as we would back off medications, some of it was, well, let's see what your marker is after we've been off for a while. Maybe the medication is still doing it. And when eventually all the medications were stopped and it was just diet and exercise and fasting and, things that were getting me healthy, they were believers. And, even for markers that they wouldn't normally test, fasting insulin was not something that my doctor normally tested, but was like, I never thought I would see that. An A1C, she said, I don't even see people who've never had diabetes have a 4.2 A1C. So just stunned. And especially because she's known that that's 30 years of being a type 2, 32 years of being a type 2.
Yeah. And I always think too, it wasn't even that it started 32 years ago. It started well before that. It just didn't show up as crossing that line yet. So, this was something that probably started for you 42 years ago, 45 years ago.
Oh, yeah.
So really remarkable to think of the changes you could make in your physical health, your biomarkers that we've all been kind of taught doesn't happen. We're taught diabetes is a chronic, progressive disease. And I always think, yeah, it is because of how we have treated it and thought about it. But you are living proof that it is not chronic nor progressive if we change the root cause. As Dr. Fung would say, this is a lifestyle disease. Something else I was just wondering for you that I think so many people in our community share and talk about, and also people out there, listeners who might be thinking about doing more fasting or changing their eating more. One of the barriers that holds a lot of people back is, how am I going to navigate this in my actual life? Like if you put me, lock me up in a room and have me do this, sure, I can do it. But what am I going to do with socializing? What am I going to do when my wife and I are on these trips to various places? How am I going to take this lifestyle change with me? And so I'm curious if you could share any about your experience and how have you navigated this outside of just you, but with your wife, with travel, with other people?
It's been challenging, but I have some advantages that we don't do a lot of outside socializing where I don't have a lot of pressure with that some other people do. It's just my wife and I. So in terms of family meals and things like that, that's much more negotiable. But there has to be a flexibility there. My wife is not on board with my diet in any way, shape, or form in terms of adopting it. She's perfectly fine with me doing it, but she's not going to go with it. So what we do is we pick things that we can cook together and have together, and then change what's with it and portions and navigate it that way. When we travel, it's more challenging. Obviously, 2 meals a day and fasting, things like that are more of a challenge when I'm traveling. So I need to be flexible because I do not want to spoil her time because she's still eating 3 meals a day. But at the same time, I'm not going to let myself go off the rails. This is too important. So it's about compromise. So when we travel, I may eat 3 meals a day, but completely TRE and completely my meals, at least as completely as I can. There may be seed oils, but I'll be careful. But I'm not going to demand to see the chef and watch them while they cook my meal. We make decisions about restaurants that make her happy and she can have what she wants and what she wants to try. We went to England, and so she wanted to try certain foods, go to a high tea, do things that weren't going to work for me. But I participated, but with my food. I'd pick out what I could have, watch her enjoy what she wanted. I never felt like I was missing out. I never felt like, oh, I need to have that. But again, not because I'm superhuman, but because I didn't have the craving. I don't have artificial sweeteners. I don't have the processed foods that would keep cravings still alive, but at bay. They're just not there. And I know that's hard to believe for people who are starting out because I would never have believed it. It took time and it took concentrating and it took those things to make it happen. But that's how we navigate it. And when I come back, I start fasting again. I turn the dial back up and get back on board, go back to the 2 meals a day and going back to the give and take pattern that my wife and I have about what we cook and how we cook.
I feel like as we've been talking today, Dave, I'm just sitting here nodding my head the whole time because I swear for those people who are in the community and come to meetings, you probably recognize this, but I feel like you just took the top 2 things from every meeting you've ever attended and just talked about how these are just normal parts of your life now. We talk a lot in the community about finding your why. Simon Sinek said, doing hard work for something that you don't really care about, that's called stress. Doing something difficult for something you value, that's passion. And you highlighted earlier in your sharing of your story, a big transition for you was when you really drilled down to that why. Because you could have stayed on the old path. You could have kept limping along on that old path. But it was taking away things in your life. It was, it was kind of shrinking your life experiences. And you really dug in. And that why, it sounds like it really motivated you then to do the things that are challenging and do them consistently, not sometimes, but to really do them as a way of life.
And that really is it, that it's difficult, but it's so important to me. It's important to my wife. It's important to my life. And like you said, being consistent, not wavering, not doing that made it easier, that it gradually got easier and easier to do things because I dragged things along with me. My biomarkers, fixing those things made it easier to do the more difficult things.
Absolutely. Well, Dave, I told you I would ask this, and I feel like you've already touched on it a couple of times, but just in case anyone didn't pull these out yet, I'm curious, knowing what you know now, 30 some years after first being diagnosed and more years than that, struggling with obesity, what would you say, knowing what you know now, to someone earlier on in this process or someone who's struggling in this process?
I'd say the big picture thing that I really would say is get that finish line out of your head. Understand from the beginning, as early as you can, that you have to make a big change, that it's got to be a way of life. Not always the same, not carved in stone, not that there won't be changes, but that this is the way you're going to live the rest of your life with changes. And that as you go through, you're going to make changes. But rule number one, only change one thing at a time. Don't go crazy. You go to meetings, you listen to podcasts, you go on the internet, you hear 40,000 little tweaks that can make things faster, better, stranger, whatever you may hear. And you're going to be tempted to grab them all. Don't. Sit back. Be patient. Concentrate on the big levers and big dials. That's where you're going to make a difference. That the different bone broth recipe that you drink while standing on your head isn't going to be what makes you successful. Concentrate on the important things. And, as you move along, if you want to pick one of those smaller things, go for it. But don't, go, oh, I heard this today. Let me do that. I heard that. No, big levers, big dials.
I love it. Don't chase those shiny objects.
Exactly. And it's so easy to do.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Dave, I've so enjoyed getting to talk with you today. And again, it's really reaffirming to me that even though you may not share in groups, you are listening and you are absorbing what you're learning from others and from the coaches and doing the coaching that you're doing and having taken a master class, that you are really actively invested in your journey. You're not a bystander. You're not just waiting for things to happen for you. You are really actively making this your life.
And TFM is such a valuable resource and part of that it's been vital in my success. And I'm so thankful for that because it allows me to pull what I need without compelling me to do things that I'm not comfortable with. It's there and it's what you make of it.
Absolutely. Well, Dave, thank you so much for joining me today. I really appreciate even that you had reached out initially with a message, I think through the forum, that first kind of grabbed my attention. So I really appreciate you being willing to share all of this with us today. Congratulations on all that you've been working on. And I can't wait to keep hearing more from you as we go.
Thank you so much.
All right, everyone. We'll be back next time with another episode. Until then, happy fasting.